Today we honor Sanford Porter Jr. and his family. He was born June 25, 1823, at Vienna, Liberty Township, Trumbull County, Ohio, the seventh child and fifth son of Sanford Porter and Nancy Warrener. The early activities of Sanford Jr. were given in his father's autobiography, page 84.
In 1827, we again sold our all, this time for the purpose of journeying towards the land of the setting sun to the fertile country of the Illinois, in company of a Mr. John Morgan. We constructed a flatboat which we launched on the Mahoning River, not far from our home at Liberty. Loading it with our effects, we floated down the Mahoning, then into the Beaver, then into and down the Ohio. This journey was fraught with danger and adventure, as the country was wild and uninhabited. But our first danger was going over the falls of the Beaver River, some distance above its confluence with the Ohio. As we neared the falls, we drew to shore and disembarked all the women and children. In fact, all except Mr. Morgan and two pilots, leaving them with the boats, and the rest followed down the stream, watching the boat with intense interest as it drew near the suck, which plunged it over the falls. For a few moments we thought all was lost, but she soon came in sight, right side up, and no material damage was done. On the 4th of May, 1827, we disembarked near Evansville, Indiana, and we rented a farm of a Mr. Gentry and planted a crop. Then in March 1828, we again took up our march toward Illinois. The wagon we hauled our belongings in, although common in those pioneer days, would seem very novel in the construction at the present time. It was built in the form of a truck, the wheels being made of pine logs, mortised together with a large hole through the axle for the linchpin. We used tallow for wagon grease. With this rude construction, drawn by 2 yoke of oxen, we traveled northwest from Evansville, crossing the Wabash River into Illinois. We had very stormy weather, as is usual in that part of the country in early spring. One night we spent in the hollow base of a large tree, finding protection from the cold wind with a fair degree of comfort. After crossing the Wabash, we were joined by a Mr. Baldwin Clark and family, who had made previous arrangements to join our company when we reached that point. Thus we pursued our journey into Tazewell County, Illinois. As we journeyed on, we were filled with wonder and admiration at the beautiful country lying before us as far as the eye could see, covered with luxuriant growth of natural vegetation. We journeyed on, crossing the Sangamon River and arriving at our destination sometime in June. We camped about 3 miles from the Illinois River and Peoria up the river about 8 miles on the west bank of the Tazewell River. After exploring the country with a Mr. Morris Phelps, we took up a farm about 3 miles east of the town. Although in a fertile country, we had many perplexities to meet, as is the case in a new country. Everything must be made at home: utensils, farming implements, shoes, clothing, etc. We had to work on the principle, if you want anything, make it, and few tools to work with.
They moved to an area about 3 miles east of Pekin, Tazewell County, Illinois. Sanford Sr., in his autobiography, gives us some further details of interest.
We stopped at Farm Creek, and Mr. Clark bought a farm there. I did not like it there very well, for I could see that many farms were deserted on account of that creek getting wicked in the spring and piling heaps of wood and deep sand on the farms after the crops had been dug up several inches. So I went further up onto the edge of the prairie and found a place that pleased me very well. About 40 acres covered with beautiful white oak, thrifty and good-sized, with a good road running from the Wabash to Port Clark, now called Peoria. I moved my family up there, and once more we went to clearing land and making logs to build a house, a barn, pigsty, and other things, to plow again and to plant, and to reap and get ready for winter. We had plenty of work to do, and then some. I got Morris Phelps to help me, and by winter time we were quite comfortable. After we had been here a while, Morris and I thought we would go into partners and build a sawmill, each standing half of the expense, and sharing half of the profits. There were but 2 mills in an area of 30 or 40 miles. We saw no reason why we should not pick up a good business. The country was settling up fast, and all the newcomers would all need lumber and such to build their homes. Everything went along fine until it came time to make the water wheel. When it was all ready, Morris rolled a log about a foot through onto the carriage, hoisted the gate, and let the water in as big as you please. She ran up quick enough, but when she came down and hit the wheel, she stopped. The wheel would not turn fast enough to even start the saw. When Morris worked at that thing until he got tired out, red in the face and sweating all over, then quit. He told me I could have the damn thing if I would take over the debts he was owing. If your debts aren't more than your half or share, I will take them over for you, provided your creditors are willing to take me as a paymaster. That man would go in debt for good and fancy clothes just as long as people would trust him. I told him I would never ask any living man for $1 trust unless we hadn't a crumb in the house to eat. A man by the name of Camelon owned one of the mills I have spoken of, and when spring came, he went to Peoria and told all the merchants and everyone I was owing, on account of taking over Morris's debts, that they would never get a penny out of me, for as soon as the snow started melting, the water would come down so fast that every inch of my mill would go downstream. I heard of this, went over to Peoria, and told my creditors not to worry about what I owed them until they heard my mill had gone out. Then they could set the law on me. Well, I sawed enough lumber between the 1st of April and the middle of June to settle up everything I owed, and some to spare. I stepped out of the house one morning to go to the mill and met 2 strange men. We passed the time of day, and one of them handed me a letter, sealed. I opened it and found it was from Morris Phelps, who then lived on the DuPage about 30 miles from Chicago. My friend tells me you are preachers of a new profession. We will walk into the house, gentlemen. I bade them remove their knapsacks and be seated, and asked if they had been to breakfast. They had not. I then told my womenfolk to prepare a good breakfast for these gentlemen, and asked them to excuse me while I went to the mill to see how the boys were coming on with the work, and said I would soon be back. I told the boys respecting the new preachers, and that I must go to them, so they must watch very closely that which they did. Morris told me in his letter that these men had been preaching in their neighborhood, and had set the Methodist, Baptist, and every other religious profession in an uproar, and he wanted me to search them to the bottom and find out, if possible, what their belief was, and write him my conclusion. I went back to the house and said, "Well, gentlemen, I am ready to hear you expound your doctrine." They told me that they had a prophet, seer, and revelator, that they had apostles, and that their church was organized just as the ancient church of Christ was organized, that they had the same gifts, the same power to heal the sick and to cast out devils, the power to ordain every male member to the priesthood, and that these men were given authority to preach the gospel to every nation and kindred, tongue, and people. If people believed and repented of their sins, the elders of their church were commanded to baptize them by immersion in water, and to lay their hands upon their heads, and bestow upon them the gift of the Holy Ghost, which would lead them into all truth. As they talked, I surely prayed in my heart that what they were telling me was true. They showed me a new book they had with them, and explained where and how it was obtained. I took the book, and together we searched it. For 3 days and nights, almost without sleep, we searched it. I asked them what their interpretation was to many passages of Scripture. About daylight of the third night, I told them I had asked all the questions I could think of, and they wanted to know what I thought of their doctrine. If you have told me all the truth, gentlemen, and I have not the least doubt of it, your church is the right church and the only one on the face of the whole earth. A different account adds the following. About the year 1829, I and Morris Phelps and John Cooper commenced the creation of a sawmill on Farm Creek about 3 miles from my home. But before the mill was put in successful operation, I and my 2 sons purchased the interest of the other 2 parties, but finding it difficult to run both farm and mill, we sold our farm and moved to the mill, where we resided till 1831. It was while living on the mill on Farm Creek that we became converted to the Mormon faith, joining the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We were converted and baptized by Lyman White and John Carrill.
The following quotes from the book Charles C. Rich by Leonard J. Arrington, page 14, helps fill in some interesting gaps concerning conversion and baptism, August 10th, 1831, of Sanford, Nancy, Chauncey, Melinda, and Sarah. In the spring of 1830, Joseph Rich settled on Farm Creek, about 3 miles from Fort George Rogers Clark, which lay to the west on the other side of the Illinois River. Fort Clark, later called Peoria, had only a few log cabins and the remains of a fort that had been partially destroyed in 1818. As yet, Illinois settlers were reluctant to establish themselves on the extensive prairie lands of the state. With their fertile soil and tough sod, rather they cleared the wooded land along the rivers and creeks. The only neighbors the Riches had at that time were the families of Morris Phelps and Sanford Porter Sr., both of whom would play important roles in Charles Rich's life. Morris Phelps later recalled that the country was filled with Indians, but not very hostile, more than to rob the few inhabitants of their bread and frequently steal our horses. Charles spent from August to October in Indiana, working to pay for the 80-acre Rich land claim. He arrived home in time to experience one of the most severe winters in Illinois history. In Tazewell County, snow fell to a depth of 4 feet on the level and 18 to 20 feet in drifts. A period of extreme cold followed, the temperature sometimes dropping as low as 10 to 20 degrees below zero. Cattle and many wild animals perished. The Riches' neighbors were first to become concerned about religious question. Morris Phelps thought much more about religion, but was troubled by a personal experience of his friend Sanford Porter. Phelps related,
He had a vision some years previous and was shown or told that all the different churches on the whole earth were wrong, that the Lord did not acknowledge any of them, but that the Lord would establish his church again on the earth, and that it would be established in his, Porter's, day. It would gather out the honest in heart of all nations. In the rehearsal of this vision, I discovered an honest sincerity that he had seen a vision. I was in more trouble of mind than before. I read the Bible much, yet my mind was veiled, and I was afforded no relief. My mind about 3.5 years was thus afflicted.
After selling his property in Tazewell County and moving to Chicago in late 1830, Phelps returned to his former home for a visit in 1831, and while there received a letter from one of his Ohio relatives about a new church. She wrote concerning a new book called the Book of Mormon, that it was translated from writings on plates, said to be done by the gift and power of the Holy Ghost, and the plates were of pure gold, found by the direction of an angel in New York State. The news burned deep within Phelps, and he shared it with his close friends.
On reading of this new church and a prophet created such a curiosity and anxiety mingled with joy that I could not refrain from weeping. The next day I read concerning the new book, the Book of Mormon, to Charles C. Rich. He was anxious to learn more concerning the new book, Church and Prophet. I also read the letter to Mr. Porter, who also was enthusiastically overjoyed. Phelps returned home early in July and had just completed writing a letter to inquire about the new book, Church and Prophet, when an acquaintance, James Emmett, rode up with two Mormon preachers who were on foot in traveling costume, knapsack, and valise on their backs. Emmett arranged for the two, Lyman White and John Correll, to preach at Phelps' house that evening and the following morning.
The two Mormons preached before an audience of about 20, including Phelps and his wife and several of their neighbors, and baptized James Emmett. As the missionaries left, Morris Phelps gave them a letter of introduction to his former neighbor, Sanford Porter. Thereupon Phelps recalls, Lyman White prophesied,
"We shall baptize Mr. Porter and ordain him an elder, and he will come here 4 weeks from today, and will preach here, and will baptize all 4 of you," meaning myself and wife Laura, and John Cooper and wife. The 2 women were sisters. The missionaries proceeded to Tazewell County, where in August Charles C. Rich recalled, Lyman White and John Correll preached the gospel in our neighborhood. Sanford Porter was indeed baptized, and he baptized Morris Phelps that same month. Sanford Sr. tells about crossing the Mississippi River. My eldest son was sent ahead February 1832 with the first wagon and 2 yoke of oxen hitched to it, and was told to stop at a certain sandbar more than halfway across the Mississippi River and there wait until the main body of the company came up. But he disobeyed our instructions and drove on across while many people on both sides of the river were holding their breath in fear. But he went over all right, and a shout of wonder and surprise went up from the people, and many said they saw the ice rise and fall in waves behind the wagon. But more care was taken when crossing the rest of the company. They all crossed the sandbar 1 team at a time, then unhitched the teams and drove them over, then hitched a horse at the end of the tongue to distribute the weight to as long a distance as possible. In that way we all crossed in safety by 10 o'clock. After journeying a number of days in the state of Missouri, a halt was made to give the teams a much-needed rest. The next day we resumed our journey. We crossed the Mississippi River at Arrow Rock, which is east from Kansas City, and nearly halfway across the state from Kansas City. The crossing of the river was made by ferry boat, and owing to the swift current at that place, considerable judgment and care was necessary in order to make a soft landing. Shortly after crossing the river, we were met by Morris Phelps, returning from Independence with the means he had been sent for, and on March 1st, 1832, we arrived at our destination after a cold and tedious journey, and the hazardous crossing of the rivers. But by the blessings of the God of Israel, we were all alive and well, and happily united with those of our faith, and feeling fully repaid for all the hardships we had endured. We found that great things were laid out for the people to do. In the first place, the saints were required to live by the law of consecration of stewardship, as they did in the days of Enoch. We expected to reside in peace until the second coming of the Savior, and we were to build a magnificent temple to his holy name. The majority of the people voted to sustain the prophet Joseph in his plans. The temple block was then covered with a thick growth of timber, but the brethren went to work with a will, clearing off the timber, using it for building and other purposes. 4 branches of the church had been organized to the west of Independence, extending out to a distance of 12 or 14 miles, namely Big Blue, Timber, Colville, and Prairie. I and my family located at the last named place, being assigned about 20 acres to the family. The labor of assigning of the land was in the hands of Bishop Edward Partridge. We went to work immediately, clearing land and building houses. But the seed of contention, once started, spread in our own community, but with those not of our own faith, and strife ran to such a degree that we were driven from our homes without court or counsel, and that at the point of the bayonet and the muzzle of the gun. In 1833 we were driven in a body from our newly made homes. We then went into Caldwell and other counties to make our homes, but not for long were we allowed to enjoy them. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints soon found there was no place in the United States where it could dwell in peace. On the 12th of November, 1833, while the main body of the saints who had been hurriedly driven from their homes were camped on the south bank of the Missouri River with no way of making an immediate crossing, and the mob who had driven us were still in pursuit, and as they said they were under a pledge to kill men, women, and children. As soon as overtaken, a heavy storm came up, and the guards said the mob were upon us. But before they began to attack, the storm broke in meteoric violence, the worst that any of us had ever seen, and in seeming fear the mob fled from their intended victories, and we looked upon the storm as a miraculous deliverance by the hand of God. To describe the storm, it looked like the stars were falling thickly for a while, then only a few would fall. Then it would renew its violence and fall thickly again. So it kept up until nearly dawn before it ceased. Instead of crossing with the main body of the saints, I, with a few others, traveled south and camped at the head of the Osage River. Then we traveled down the South Fork for some distance. Then our little company of about 15 families camped for the winter. I was among my bitter enemies, with no money to buy with. There are a number of conflicting dates of baptism for Sanford Jr. The 40th Quorum of 70 record, page 241, gives, baptized February 1833 by Ellis Heames. He was confirmed the same day by his father, Sanford Porter Sr., as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at Prairie, near Independence, Missouri. The archive record family group sheet gives July 25, 1835, but I find no ward record or other official record to verify this date. Sanford Jr. gave the Logan 5th Ward clerk the following: baptized March 1833 by Ellis Eames, and confirmed March 1833 by David Patton. His brother Nathan T. states, myself, brothers John and Sanford, with several others, were baptized on or near the 20th of June, 1832, by Elder Jonathan Sumner, and confirmed under his and the hands of my father in the Prairie branch of the church, Jackson County, Missouri. Because Sanford Jr.'s Temple Index Bureau card gives no baptism date, the church caused by proxy on July 7, 1981, in the Salt Lake Temple, that he be rebaptized, and all previous church blessings were reconfirmed and ratified. When Sanford Jr.'s brother Nathan was endowed in 1846, he gave his baptism date as June 15, 1832, which is accepted by the church as an official entry. And since he said his brother Sanford was baptized the same day by Jonathan Sumner, the writer believes this to be the best data to use for Sanford Jr.'s original baptism information. Sanford Jr., now age 8, passed through the trials and persecutions of the church in his youth. Sanford Jr. and his parents spent the winter of 1833 and 1834 on a tributary of the main river, clearing land and building more houses in an uninhabited wilderness with other refugees. 14 other families stayed with them with nothing but their own resourcefulness to keep them alive. The next few years were very trying ones for the church and for the members. It was also a period of speculation and financial failure for the whole United States. Many of the members in Kirtland, Ohio, and the branches of the church everywhere were having financial difficulties as well as spiritual troubles. Perhaps the Porter family were even spared some of the contention that went on in the most populated areas of the church. They were too isolated to know of some of the troubles of the outside world, but their vicissitudes and hardships only seemed to strengthen and increase their determination to endure whatever was necessary to be able to worship according to their convictions.
When the saints were driven from Jackson County and went into Clay County, the old settlers there were hospitable and accepted the Mormons with kindness, but with the belief that through legal process the Mormons would eventually have their homes returned to them. Since all courts of law from the governor down never honored nor enforced the law, the saints still had no place to go, and as time went on there was a restlessness growing in the community. In 1836 a good number of the saints had taken up residence in Caldwell County, Missouri. They had obtained property and homes through purchase, and had sent a petition to the governor asking for a county organization. This petition was granted, and hopes now seem possible for a peaceful habitation. The colonies of Mormons grew by leaps and bounds, and the Porter family remained faithful to the prophet Joseph Smith and church doctrine. It was during this tumultuous period that many new developments, instructions, and church policies were being presented to the members through revelations to become the doctrine and covenants of the church. We know from Essentials in Church History that the prophet made his second visit to Missouri in April 1832, where at a general council of the church Joseph Smith was acknowledged by the saints in Zion as president of the high priesthood, ratifying the action of the Amherst, Ohio Conference held January 25, 1832, so sustaining him. Surely the Porter family also attended the momentous occasion.
Because of dissension and unrest in the Kirtland, Ohio area, both in and out of the church, it became necessary to move the headquarters of the church to far west Missouri in 1838, and more people came there hoping to settle differences and live peacefully. This was not to be, however, and the time came when another move was inevitable. For a period of 7 years, the members of the church endured opposition from their neighbors, political officials, apostate and excommunicated people who had once accepted the teachings of the church, and cruel beatings, arrests, and slander by mobsters. Their homes were ransacked and destroyed. Their leaders were jailed and tormented. There were a few happy times when they held such things as a 4th of July celebration, worked on building the promised temple, and heard their beloved prophet preach and teach, and received many new gems of the gospel. The practice of the United Order was taken away and replaced with the law of tithing. Many other important revelations were inaugurated, but always there was grief for the unjust decisions made by the courts, and eventually they were driven from another state. Some of the general authorities of the church were able to find friendly treatment in the area of Commerce, Illinois, and in May 1839 Joseph Smith took up residence on some property he purchased there. He also bought some property across the river at Montrose, Iowa. It was here that the Porter family came. Sanford Jr. would now be aged 15. The name of the city of commerce was changed to Nauvoo, and again the saints began the task of making a beautiful city of land unwanted by anyone else. Again they all began to hew homes out of nothing. This time, however, they were much wiser as to the working of political governments, and Joseph Smith drew up a city charter with special safeguards that he hoped would protect the saints if ever another time came when persecution cropped up again. It had broad legislative powers, the city council to be elected by voters, municipal court to be independent of any but the Supreme Court and state and federal courts. The plan was accepted by the Illinois legislature. Nauvoo could have a city militia known as the Nauvoo Legion. It was to be equipped by the state.
Life was busy and interesting in the Nauvoo area for a few years. The Prophet Joseph's leadership abilities made the Legion a well-trained outfit, and they were a colorful sight to behold as they drilled or paraded in the city square. Nauvoo had become a social center. Celebrations such as the 4th of July always included drills by the Nauvoo Legion. Socials and games all helped to lift the spirit of the oppressed. The temple was under construction. People were building better homes, educational opportunities were provided, and for a while they were a happy people. In 1841, Sanford Jr.'s 13-year-old brother, Justin Theodore, was killed when a horse fell on him. Political and religious enemies began to agitate in the community. Once again, the people had to be on guard. The temple construction was guarded night and day. Hosea Stout, who had been a friend and neighbor since the Tazewell County days, tells in his journal of the situation in 1846.
I was there notified by President Brigham Young to send spies out into different parts of the country to watch and report the proceedings of the mob. I committed the business of sending spies out in Iowa to Sanford Porter, who lives in Iowa. He was to send some 3 or 4 in different directions to watch their movements and let us know when anything is going on among them against us. Sanford Porter was one of the most faithful members of the Mormon Church at that time, and also most respected among non-members. He was the father of a large family, all of whom were active in and loyal to the church. Living across the line in Iowa, he escaped many of the difficulties of Nauvoo. Porter followed the pioneer group to Utah in the fall of 1847 with the Charles C. Rich Company, and the next season he sent back teams and supplies to meet the immigrants, and he served as bishop. In spite of the great precautions Joseph Smith had taken to prevent the church from being put into a vulnerable position again, the mob and political leaders began anew to persecute the people, and it was evident that they would yet have to find another place to practice their beliefs. Joseph Smith decided to run for President of the United States, and Sanford Jr.'s brother Nathan went to Ohio to campaign for him. Mob violence reigned, and they murdered the prophet Joseph Smith June 27, 1844. Even before the martyrdom of Joseph, the people had begun to plan how to move on further west. Brigham Young, who had been president of the Council of 12 Apostles, was now considered their new prophet. He set about at once to plan and prepare the people for outfitting each family with wagons, teams, supplies, and all it would take to move such a body of people across so many uncharted miles. They supposed, and it was promised them by their enemies, that they would have time to dispose of their property and purchase what would be needed before going. But as history can affirm, their prophet and others were murdered and the time was cut short. Once more they were driven out into the winter elements to endure or perish. But before the exodus began, all haste was put forth to finish the precious temple they had all worked so hard to complete. This was necessary to them. Even when they knew they would be leaving all the work and beauty behind, they knew they must finish it. It would be here that certain vows and blessings could be given, and it was here that all the devout members were sealed as husband and wife for all time and eternity in the new and everlasting covenant of marriage, before they set their feet west toward some unknown future in a strange country. On January 21, 1846, the first of the saints left Nauvoo and crossed the Mississippi River on the journey to the west. Through all the trials, persecutions, and testing, the saints who were left in the church were strong, faithful, and determined. They would take the necessary discipline that it would take to stand the trials yet to come. There would be many more, but Brigham Young said that he doubted if ever there was a body of people since the days of Enoch who had done so little grumbling under such unpleasant and trying circumstances. Due to sickness and having to replenish supplies, etc., or the weather and unpassable roads, progress was very slow. The wagon train averaged only a mile or two a day. They didn't travel on Sundays. They slept on frozen ground, muddy ground. All cooking had to be done in the open. Sometimes the cows had to be yoked to the wagons. When they left Sugar Creek, February 25, 1846, there was a 3-inch cover of snow that had to be brushed away. They slept on the ground because the wagons were loaded with supplies. After the snow melted, things weren't much better because then there was mud. March and April it rained almost continually. At one time the wagons had to be unloaded and pulled empty over the worst places. All these companies were called the Camp of Israel. They reached Garden Grove the latter part of April and Mount Pisgah in mid-May. The company stayed here at this temporary stopping-off place until March 1847. Sanford Jr. was ordained a 70 October 8, 1845, and later was a member of the 40th Quorum of 70. Sanford moves westward once again as the Saints are driven from Illinois and with their family leave in February of 1846, passing famous landmarks on their way. Winter Quarters, which is now Florence, Douglas County, Nebraska, according to Jensen's Encyclopedic History of the Church. In December 1846, the place consisted of 548 log houses and 83 sod houses, inhabited by 3,483 souls. The place was also divided into 22 wards, each presided over by a bishop. When the requisition was made on the Mormons for 500 men to compose the Mormon battalion, Sanford was with his father's family at Winter Quarters and enlisted in Company E, directly under the command of Captain Davis. The history of the travels of this battalion are given in detail by Daniel Tyler in his History of the Mormon Battalion. Some effort had been made to court the favor of the government of the United States prior to this time, and some offers had been made to assist in taking possession of the western part of the United States, which was then in the possession of Mexico. General Kearny, who was in command of the Army of the West, in a letter written under date of June 19, 1846, to Colonel Allen, directed the latter officer to raise the battalion of 500 men from the Mormon camps in Iowa, and in a letter written at Pisgah under date of June 26, Allen made known his mission to the Saints. From Pisgah he went immediately to Winter Quarters, where on July 1st President Young and the 12 apostles decided in council that the battalion should be furnished at any cost, and the Mormon chieftain proceeded to Pisgah with the colonel. By the 16th of the month, 4 companies and part of the 5th, numbering in all over 400 men, were mustered into service and began drawing pay, and on the same day were marched to the Missouri River, a distance of 8 miles from Winter Quarters, where such supplies as they needed immediately were purchased. On the 20th they left Winter Quarters for Fort Leavenworth, the balance of Company E being mustered into service immediately and overtaking the main body at Mosquito Creek, a short distance down the Missouri River. Their course from Winter Quarters to Leavenworth was down the eastern side of the Missouri until opposite Fort Leavenworth, then across the river to the fort, which they reached August 1st, having all crossed the river that day. Among their experiences on the way was a hurricane, which came upon them the second night below St. Joseph, July 30th, which felled trees on all sides of the camp, but the only injury done the battalion was the loss of 1 mule killed. They passed St. Joseph on July 29th, marching to the music of "The Girl I Left Behind Me." At Leavenworth, Companies A, B, and C were issued their arms and accoutrements on August 3rd, and on the following day Companies D and E were also thus supplied. Colonel Allen seems to have been a man and a gentleman, and not an enemy to the Mormons. He was not above joking with the boys. At the time of issuing the arms, he found a large crowd of the boys awaiting their muskets, when he jovially accosted them, telling them not to be in a hurry to get their guns, as they would wish to throw the damn things away before they got to California. Allen was taken sick at this fort, however, and died there on August 26, 1846. Companies A, B, and C left the fort on August 12th, and on the 14th the other 2 companies left. Their route from here was southwest across the Kansas or Kaw River, diagonally across the state of Kansas to the Cimarron River, which they followed into New Mexico, reaching Santa Fe on the 9th and 12th of October. It should be stated that at Leavenworth they drew a bounty of $42 each on August 5th, most of which the members of the battalion sent back to their relatives and to the church in general at Council Bluffs and other camps. Also, that in signing the payroll it was found that every member of the battalion could sign his own name, much to the surprise of the officers, as the Missouri volunteers, who were there at the same time, were able to do so in only about one instance out of 3.
At Council Grove, about the last of August, the battalion received word of the death of their beloved Colonel Allen, and at Diamond Springs, a few miles west, Lieutenant Smith assumed command, much to the chagrin of the boys, who had wished one of their own number to take charge. Their choice seemed to be Captain Jefferson Hunt. Lieutenant Smith and also the battalion physician, Dr. Sanderson, both made a rather unsavory reputation with the soldiers of the battalion. Smith was by no means careful of his soldiers and animals, as might have been expected in many instances, and it seemed really showed poor judgment at times. Long marches during extremely hot summer days while crossing the deserts of western Kansas for many hours without water caused much sickness among the men, and the doctor's medicine seemed to many to have only added more poison to their systems. It is said that the only medicine used by Sanderson was arsenic and calomel, and at times a concoction of bayberry bark and ameline flowers for the improvement of the blood. While the properties of the latter may have had a good effect of cleansing the blood at times, the former, in most instances, did more harm than good, according to the stories of the battalion boys, who often concealed the fact that they were ill rather than to take the medicine prescribed, and ladled out all from the same old worn and battered iron spoon, which they thought he had picked up at some old camping ground, or perhaps it was some heirloom handed down in his family, which, because of its association, was always held in high esteem by the doctor. It seemed that at times the men had the impression that Smith and Sanderson were determined to kill as many of them as possible, and one by giving them long forced marches and make them sick, and the other by compelling them to take his poisonous medicine. That the latter was not interested in the welfare of the sick as he should have been is well illustrated in his conduct shortly before reaching Santa Fe. Word had just been received that unless the battalion reached that town by October 10th, it would be disbanded. And in order that they might report as being there, Smith picked out the strongest men of the army and made a hurried march to that city, leaving the sick and weaker behind to come along as best they might. Sanderson, instead of remaining and caring for the sick, went with the company of well men, who so little needed the services of a medical man. It is stated on good authority, however, that during the absence of the physician there was a marked improvement in general among the soldiers left behind, so that apparently the course of the doctor was really a blessing to the poorly cared for men, and perhaps saved the life of some whom his poison might have killed. A personal experience of Sanford Porter, which occurred on August 23rd, just 9 days after he left Leavenworth, and just after the battalion had passed Stone Cold Creek, perhaps a small tributary of the Kansas or Kaw River, is related by Daniel Tyler as follows.
Sanford Porter of Company E was taken sick while traveling this day and fell behind the command. He suffered so intensely that he thought he must die, but while alone he summoned all his faith and called upon the Lord in fervent prayer, asking that his life might be spared if there was any further work for him to do. In an instant the pain left him, and he was as helpful and vigorous as he ever had been in his life. Santa Fe at this time was a military post, and when the Mormon battalion came to it October 9th and 12th was under the command of General Donovan, the same gentleman who during the persecution of the Mormons in Missouri had refused to unlawfully subject that people to mistreatment, and had in some instances refused the troops under his command to take part in unlawful measures. When the battalion came into Santa Fe, Doniphan ordered a salute of 100 guns fired in their honor. This was particularly noticeable when, a few days later, General Sterling Price arrived with a battalion of Missouri volunteers, and no demonstration whatever was given them. From this place, the course of the battalion was southward down the valley of the Rio Grande until a little south of Socorro, where it turned to the westward, and after great hardship, particularly from lack of water on the eastern slope of the mountains, a passage was made over the Rockies. The command was now in the hands of Colonel Cook, Smith having been superseded at Santa Fe. Cook, while he could not be considered as attentive to the needs of his men, was by no means the tyrant that his predecessor had formed the reputation of being. He was not a Mormon, and was undoubtedly not in sympathy with the Mormon cause. The requirements of the expedition may largely account for the seeming sternness at times of the military commanders in the face of extremely trying times for the men. After crossing the mountains, they went via Tucson and the Gila Valley River to San Diego, California, which they reached on January 29, 1847, finding it peacefully reposing beneath the stars and stripes. The soldiers were later marched to Los Angeles, where on July 20th they were disbanded. A few of the men re-enlisted in the Army, but a large company formed to march to the Salt Lake Valley immediately upon their release from the service of their country, and at once set out on the overland journey. Sanford Porter was with this company. On September 6th, they met Samuel Brannan, who, although he admitted that the Mormon leader had chosen Great Salt Lake Valley as the final resting place for the saints, assured them that as soon as it had been tried, Brigham would move on to California. On the day following, they met Captain Brown with news from the valley and with advice from President Young for those who had nothing for their support to, as far as possible, remain in California during the winter, where they could get work and get provisions. Many of the soldiers turned back. Sanford Porter, having, as he informs us already, obtained while in California a fairly large sum of money, came on with the portion prepared for the journey, many of whom did not intend to remain in the Salt Lake Valley, but to immediately go on to winter quarters to their families who had not yet emigrated to Utah. This company arrived in Salt Lake City on October 16, 1847. Upon his arrival here, Sanford found that his father and family had arrived 2 weeks earlier. The life of Sanford Jr. for a time after his arrival in Salt Lake City was very closely connected with that of his father. He resided with the family at Mill Creek, and in 1850 moved with it to Centerville. He received his patriarchal blessing April 27, 1850, from Patriarch John Smith. He was ordained an elder on July 25, 1852, and the same day he married his two wives, Emma Ensign, daughter of Zophar Ensign and Priscilla Billings, and Melinda Ann Porter, daughter of Chauncey Warner Porter and Amy Sumner. The marriage was performed in Salt Lake City in President Brigham Young's office. Sanford Jr. was set apart as one of the 7 presidents of the 40th Quorum of 70, February 1855. The 40th Quorum of 70 record, number 38, shows that Sanford Jr. was rebaptized February 30th, 1856 by Ellis Eames, and confirmed March 2nd, 1856 by Lot Smith. The Centerville Ward record, page 2, shows a rebaptism on September 29, 1856 by Elder Clements, and confirmed the same day by Elder Grant. The Centerville Ward record, page 10, shows he was rebaptized May 6, 1860 by Nathan Porter. His home was at Centerville until 1861, when he moved to Porterville, where his father had settled the previous year. The town of Porterville received its name, writes the Morgan County News of Friday, January 18, 1957, from the Porters who first settled there. Warner and Sanford Porter Jr. came over the mountains from Centerville, Davis County, into Hardscrabble Canyon in 1854 and built a sawmill on Beaver Creek. They carried the necessary machinery and provisions on pack mules. Lumber was taken back over the mountain to Centerville on a cart with 4 yoke of oxen. In the spring of 1861, their father, Sanford Porter Sr., came from Centerville and settled in what is now Porterville. He built the first house in that part of the valley, brought his family there, and took up land. Warner and Sanford Jr. built houses that summer, and the following spring John P. and Lyman, their brothers, also settled there. The first houses were near the present Curtis Carter residence and near the W. B. Shaw residence.
Nancy Melinda Porter Moffat, age 93, has given us some interesting pen pictures of Porterville. Sometime around the year 1860, Grandfather and his 4 stalwart sons left Centerville to find a new place to homestead. They traveled north through Davis County until they reached the mouth of the rough and rugged Weber Canyon. They passed through the canyon and entered the Weber Valley, then rode south until they had almost reached the extreme end. Here they came to the foot of a low hill or ridge. They rode up this hill, and when they had reached the top, they beheld a small but beautiful valley stretched out before them. It was near the foot of the first low hill that Grandfather dug out and leveled a place and built a 2-room log house. In the main stream they found fish in abundance, mostly trout, and also wild ducks and geese. And as they went on up the stream to see about getting water on the land, they found the beaver, muskrats, and the mink. All 3 of these were a detriment to the farmer, as the beaver builds dams across the river and all dig holes in the bank. They decided this would make a good pastime for the boys, as the fur was very valuable. They could trap them and sell their hides, thus helping to build their new homes. The 2 Porter brothers, Warner and Sanford Jr., followed the stream up into the canyon they had named Hardscrabble, making a road over boulders, rocks, and dead brush until they found a suitable place for a sawmill. In the canyon they found the mountains covered with green and dry trees of all sizes. The tiny ones could be used for fence posts, the small ones for firewood, larger ones for house logs, and the largest ones for timbers. They soon had built a sawmill with an upright saw run by water. From pioneer history, I find Sanford carried material for the mill over the mountains from Salt Lake City on pack mules, a distance of about 50 or 60 miles. It was here that they made lumber for the first homes in Porterville, and the pioneers were finally able to have wood floors in their houses instead of dirt floors. About 1865, they found suitable soil for bricks and began to burn bricks and build brick homes. The valley derived its name Porterville in honor of the Porter pioneers, and as the river and the big bank ran parallel along the middle of the valley, it was called East and West Porterville. The next step was to provide a suitable place for meeting and school. So the leading men on both sides got together and concluded that one large building would suffice for the time being. They all worked together in a few days, had a nice log building erected on the west side.
Chauncey Warner Porter had been appointed as acting bishop. He gave the northwest corner of his farm for the purpose of erecting a church schoolhouse, and in 1868 a brick building was completed and stood on the land at the beginning of the west bank, overlooking the grove of trees. Thus they had a suitable building in East and West Porterville for worship and schools. According to Jensen's Encyclopedic History of the Church, in the summer of 1860, Chauncey Warner Porter and Sanford Porter Jr. joined their father on East Canyon Creek. Previous to this, in 1854, some of his family commenced the erection of a sawmill in Hardscrabble Canyon. Regular LDS meetings were commenced in private cabins in charge of Chauncey W. Porter, who acted under the direction of Bishop Thomas Jefferson Thurston. Both branches were organized as separate bishops' wards in 1877. Sanford Jr. built the first sawmill constructed in Morgan County in Hardscrabble Canyon, some miles west of Porterville, in the year 1854. This early sawmill was located at the junction of Beaver and Hardscrabble Canyons, at the base of the steeper part of the descent from the summit of the Wasatch Range between Weber and Salt Lake Valleys on the eastern side of the range. The mill house has entirely disappeared, although debris scattered around plainly bears evidence that a building had at some time been on the spot. The Porterville Ward record, page 16, shows Sanford Jr. was rebaptized August 13, 1868 by Lyman White Porter and confirmed the same day by Thomas Bruff. He resided at Porterville until 1868, when he moved to the Muddy in the southwestern part of Nevada to assist in the settlement of that country. This mission had originated the previous year, when at the October conference 158 men had been called to take their families and settle there. Sanford took one of his families, that of Emma Ensign, leaving Porterville late in the year. This place was located a few miles up the Muddy River from its confluence with the Rio Virgin, on the east side of the stream, directly across the river from Overton, which may still be found on any good map of the state of Nevada. The route traveled was the main road to St. George, Utah, thence down the Rio Virgin through the northwest corner of Arizona into Nevada to within a few miles of the confluence of that stream with the Muddy River, then westward over the low divide separating the two river valleys to the latter stream. Although a company of emigrants made the journey at the same time, it seems that the Porters traveled alone a good deal of the way, with the exception of being with the Mr. Stevenson and family. This small company had but 3 wagons, 2 of which were drawn by mule teams, and aside from the 3 teams had with them 2 cows and a pony. At one time, Sevilla Ann, one of the younger children, was lost for a time, which because of the country being infested with Indians caused considerable danger to other members of the small party, as well as the anxiety incident to the search. Sanford had the misfortune of having the wheel of a heavily loaded wagon run over the instep of his foot, and as surgical or medical assistance was not obtainable, the ensuing lameness caused him a great deal of inconvenience during the remainder of the journey. While on the Rio Virgin, about 2 days' travel from their destination on the Muddy River, all their teams, with the exception of 1 mule, were stolen by the Indians, which necessitated them sending ahead for assistance and caused a few days' delay. The last of the journey was made in the nighttime, St. Joseph being reached just before daybreak. The outlook in this newly settled country seemed to be anything but encouraging. Sanford sold one of his wagons and purchased another mule to complete his team, with which to do up a city lot at Overton, and immediately setting to work, prepared ground and planted a crop in the spring of 1869. Crops, however, were a failure on the Muddy during this year.
The climate also was found to be unhelpful, and fever and ague carried off a number of the settlers, among them Jared, a younger son of Sanford and Emma. His elder son, Marius, was also seriously stricken with the fever, and it was perhaps only by the timely removal from that locality that his life was saved. Sanford, with his family, setting out for Porterville late in May, and reaching that place about the 1st of the following July of the year 1869. Sanford remained at Porterville from 1869 until 1877, when in response to a call from President Brigham Young, he made a trip from northern Arizona seeking for a place to make a home there and assist in opening up the country. On this trip he took with him his son Sanford Marius. They returned in the spring of 1878, but in the late fall of 1880 Sanford returned to Arizona in company with his son and wife and others, and later moved the family of his wife Melinda Ann to that country, where they remained a few years and then returned to northern Utah. A large portion of the family of Melinda, however, either remained in or later returned to Arizona there to make their homes. Records show where he, in 1881, was sustained to the High Council of the Little Colorado State. He was ordained a high priest February 27, 1881, by Jesse Nathaniel Smith. After the deaths of his 2 wives, he in 1887 moved to Logan, Utah.
The last to pass away, Emma Ensign, having become separated from him some years previous to her death, May 10, 1900, age 67, at Farmington, Davis County, Utah. His second wife, Melinda Ann Porter, died September 22, 1886, age 50, at Centerville, Davis County, Utah. Since the members of his family had all grown up, married, and gotten homes of their own, Sanford resided most of the time in Logan, Cache County, Utah, and for many years was an almost continuous worker in the Logan Temple. Sanford Jr. was married and sealed to his third wife, Virginia Anderson Kilgore, in the Logan Temple, September 4, 1889. This last wife was known as Tude by her acquaintances. Miss Kilgore, a comparatively young woman, was a native of northern Georgia, her former home having been in the neighborhood of Kensington, in that state some 20 miles south of Chattanooga, Tennessee, where her mother and family became converted to the Mormon faith and from there emigrated to Utah. She was attentive to the wants of Sanford, and as they owned their own home and a large enough lot for gardening, they were able, with the assistance of the pension Sanford drew for his services in the Mormon battalion, to live in a fair degree of comfort. At age 90, he was still able to be around. Sanford Jr. was a carpenter and shoemaker by trade. He had double teeth all the way around, which of course made them much stronger than an ordinary set. He broke a small piece off one tooth during his earlier years by biting heads off nails, a habit he had while working as a carpenter. Otherwise, his teeth were perfect at the time of his death. Sanford Porter Jr. and Emma Ensign were the proud parents of 10 children, 6 sons and 4 daughters.
Emma Priscilla Porter was born September 23, 1853, at Centerville, Davis County, Utah, and was married April 2, 1877 at Morgan County, Utah, to Thomas Spencer. She bore him 10 children. She died January 25, 1938, age 84, at Ogden, Weber County, Utah, and was buried January 28 at the Ogden City Cemetery.
Sanford Marius Porter was born August 5, 1855, at Centerville, Davis County, Utah, and was married September 4, 1879, in the Endowment House, to Nina Melinda Levitt. She bore him 14 children. He died June 14, 1933, age 77, at Joseph City, Navajo County, Arizona, and was buried there June 16. Jared Ensign Porter was born October 22, 1857, at Centerville, Davis County, Utah. He died May 13, 1869, age 11, at St. Joseph, Navajo County, Arizona.
Sevilla Ann Porter was born November 5, 1859, at Centerville, Davis County, Utah. She died unmarried September 15, 1920, age 60. Sarah Lavera Porter was born April 2, 1861, at Centerville, Davis County, Utah. She died August 3, 1861, aged 4 months, at Centerville, Davis County, Utah, and was buried there.
Marion Marcellus Porter was born October 1, 1862, at Centerville, Davis County, Utah. He died unmarried October 13, 1885, aged 23. Aaron Milton Porter was born August 13, 1866, at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah, and was married May 16, 1896, at Farmington, Davis County, Utah, to Sylvia Beatrice Van Fleet. They adopted 1 daughter. He married second Huldah Korth, September 26, 1944, at Farmington, Davis County, Utah. There were no children born to this marriage. He died January 24, 1956, age 89, at Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was buried January 27th in the Farmington City Cemetery.
Mary Arizona Porter was born March 27, 1869, at St. Joseph, Navajo County, Arizona, and was married November 27, 1889, at Farmington, Davis County, Utah, to David Hiram Jenkins. She bore him 4 children. She died November 14, 1944, age 75, at Los Angeles County, California, and was buried November 17th in the Park Lawn Cemetery at Vail, California.
Warren Porter was born November 18, 1872, at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah. He died December 13, 1872, aged 3 weeks, at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah, and was buried there. Moses Ensign Porter was born December 21st, 1873 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah, and was married December 1st, 1897 in the Logan Temple to Matilda Stratford. They were childless. He died September 30th, 1904, age 30. Sanford Porter Jr. and his second wife, Melinda Ann Porter, were the proud parents of 13 children, 10 sons and 3 daughters. Nathan Theodore Porter was born May 27, 1853 at Centerville, Davis County, Utah, and was married April 26, 1882 in the St. George Temple to Mary Emma Bond. She bore him 4 children. He died January 2, 1929, age 75 at Joseph City, Navajo County, Arizona, and was buried there January 2nd. Samuel Uriah Porter was born October 31st, 1855 at Centerville, Davis County, Utah, and was married September 13, 1878 in the Endowment House to Mary Minerva Porter. She bore him 14 children. He died November 29, 1936, age 81 at Heber, Navajo County, Arizona, and was buried there December 2nd.
Amy Irene Porter was born December 18, 1858 at Centerville, Davis County, Utah, and was married December 1, 1880 in the St. George Temple to Charles Whiting. She bore him 2 children. She died June 13, 1886, age 27, at Colonial Diaz, Chihuahua, Mexico.
William Ira Porter was born January 30, 1860 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah, and was married March 14, 1894 in the Logan Temple to Zina Porter. She bore him 8 children. Zina died August 12, 1924, age 50 at Centerville, and was buried there August 15. He died October 18, 1933, age 73, at Centerville, Davis County, Utah, and was buried there October 22nd. Alma Porter was born February 8, 1862 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah. He died in infancy in 1862 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah, and is buried there. Alva Porter, a twin, was born February 8, 1862 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah, and was married September 29, 1899 at Heber, Navajo County, Arizona, to Charlotte Elizabeth Shelley. They were childless. He died February 4, 1940, age 77, at Heber, Navajo County, Arizona, and was buried there.
Edith Porter was born April 14, 1864 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah, and was married April 4, 1883 in the St. George Temple to Thomas Walder Brookbank. She bore him 1 son. She married 2nd Jacob Coons on June 27, 1889 in the Logan Temple. She bore him 1 son. She married 3rd Benjamin Franklin Whitmer, March 1, 1915. They were childless. She died April 26, 1935, age 71, at Mesa, Maricopa County, Arizona, and was buried April 29th at Central Graham County, Arizona.
Joseph Isaiah Porter was born June 24, 1866 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah, and was married August 28, 1895 at St. Joseph, Navajo County, Arizona, to Mary Maud Shelley. She bore him 8 children. He died May 29, 1933 at Heber, Navajo County, Arizona, and was buried there May 31st. Hiram Jeremiah Porter, a twin, was born June 24, 1866 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah. He died in infancy in 1867 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah, and is buried there. Benoni Porter was born November 29, 1868 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah. He died in infancy in 1869 at Porterville and is buried there. Moroni Porter, a twin, was born November 29, 1868 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah. He died in infancy in 1869 at Porterville and is buried there.
Nancy Angeline Porter was born January 28, 1872 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah, and was married October 9, 1895 in the Salt Lake Temple to David William Clough. She bore him 6 children. She died September 25, 1925, age 53, at Pima, Graham County, Arizona, and was buried there September 27th.
Warner Porter was born in 1872 at Porterville, Morgan County, Utah. He died January 1st, 1873 at Porterville and was buried there. Sanford Porter Jr. and Virginia Anderson Kilgore, his third wife, were childless. The first obituary of Sanford Porter Jr. appeared in the Deseret Evening News of Saturday, December 13, 1913, page 8 as follows. Death claims member of Mormon Battalion. Logan, December 13. Sanford Porter, a member of the Mormon Battalion and an old resident of Logan, died here yesterday of infirmities incident to old age. Funeral services will be held in the 5th Ward Meeting House Monday afternoon, December 15 at 1 o'clock. Mr. Porter was born in Ohio June 25, 1823, and was baptized in 1831. He passed through all the early scenes of church history and enlisted in the Mormon Battalion. After being discharged from the Army in California, he maintained his residence there for a number of years, living in the place which was subsequently called Porterville. He came to Logan in an early day and has been a well-respected citizen. In his later life he worked in the Logan Temple, but owing to failing health and the feebleness of old age, he was compelled to retire about 2 years ago. He is survived by a widow and has one son, Aaron M. Porter, who lives in Riverside, Box Elder County. The second obituary of Sanford Porter Jr. appeared in the Deseret Evening News of Wednesday, December 17, 1913, page 11, as follows. Funeral of S. Porter. Logan, December 16. The funeral of Sanford Porter was held in the 5th Ward yesterday, and a great many friends of the family turned out to pay their last respects to his memory. Addresses that were eulogistic of the departed were made by Elder Thomas Morgan, Bishop William Hyde, Bishop J. H. Roosh, and Aaron Porter, a son of the deceased. The third obituary of Sanford Porter Jr. appeared in the Deseret Evening News of Saturday, January 10, 1914, page 10, as follows. Life sketch of Sanford Porter. Logan, January 8th. Another member of the Mormon Battalion, Sanford Porter, who died December 12, 1913, at his home in Logan, was buried here December 15. For many years he had been a worker in the Logan Temple, but for some time past, owing to the enfeebled condition incident to old age, he remained at home, and for 2 months immediately preceding his death he was confined to his bed. The end came peacefully, and consciousness was retained until the last. Emma Ensign and Melinda Ann Porter were his wives. By the former he had 10 children, 5 of whom survive him. 2 sons, Sanford M. of St. Joseph, Arizona, and Aaron M. of Riverside, and 3 daughters, Mrs. Emma Spencer, Mrs. Mary Jenkins, and Sevilla Ann Porter, all of Brigham City. The latter wife bore him 13 children, and of these 7 are still living. 5 sons, Nathan T. of St. Joseph and Samuel U. of Central Arizona, William Ira of Centerville, Alva and Joseph I., both of St. Joseph, Arizona, and 2 daughters, Mrs. Edith Brookbank Coons and Mrs. Nancy Clough, both of whom reside in southern Arizona. After the death of these wives, Mr. Porter married Miss Gertrude Kilgore of Logan, a native of northern Georgia, who survives him. Sanford Porter was of New England ancestry, the family having begun migrating westward from Vermont. He was born June 25, 1823, at Vienna, Trumbull County, Ohio, and with the family moved to Indiana and later to Illinois. It was in the latter state that the gospel was brought to them by missionaries who were laboring among the Indians, and in the summer of 1830 the older members of the family united themselves with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints through the ministrations of Elders Lyman White and John Corrill. From this time, Mr. Porter's fortunes were cast almost entirely with the Mormon people. His father's family moved to Independence, Missouri in 1831, and there suffered the privations and trials incident to the expulsion of the saints from Jackson County in 1833. Shortly after the location of Nauvoo, the Porters settled in Lee County, Iowa, near Montrose, from which place they moved westward with the body of the church in 1846. Mr. Porter enlisted in Company E of the Mormon Battalion at Winter Quarters July 20, 1846, and 1 year later was discharged from the government service at Los Angeles, California. He arrived at Salt Lake City October 16, 1847, to find that his father and family had come into the valley 2 weeks earlier with the company under command of Elder Charles C. Rich. His earliest Utah home was in Mill Creek, Salt Lake County, but in 1850 he moved to Centerville, Davis County, and in 1861 to Porterville, Morgan County. In 1854 he built the first sawmill in Morgan County, in Hardscrabble Canyon, carrying the machinery on pack mules over the mountains from Centerville. He was called to the Muddy Mission by President Brigham Young in 1868 and spent the winter of 1868-69 at St. Joseph in what is now Nevada. He moved back to Porterville in the latter part of 1869. In 1880 he moved to the valley of the Little Colorado River in northern Arizona, having made a visit to that country 3 years earlier, where he lived for a number of years at Sunset, Yavapai County, with the Mormon colony under the leadership of Lot Smith. He later returned to Utah, where he spent the last years of his life working in the temple at Logan.
Total known posterity of Sanford Porter Jr., 1823-1913, as of July 28, 1985.
23 children, 73 grandchildren, 232 great-grandchildren, 542 second-great-grandchildren, for a total posterity of 870. 353 total spouses of children, grandchildren, etc., making a total posterity, including spouses, of 1,223.
As descendants of these fine and faithful people, let us remember their strong, wonderful qualities and try to live our lives to make them proud of us.